everyone, and welcome to the Surgical Ergonomics podcast, where we will be discussing everything related to surgical and procedural ergonomics, the people, ideas, and technology that will help enhance your physical wellness and career longevity. I am your host, Geeta Lal. I'm an academic endocrine surgeon, speaker, consultant, and surgical ergonomics coach. Having experienced work-related musculoskeletal injury myself, I am committed to increasing awareness of and developing solutions to counteract the impact of poor ergonomics on the professional and personal lives of healthcare workers in procedural areas. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by SmartStep Surgical LLC. As a dedicated surgeon, you know that every day presents challenges, whether it's dealing with inefficient step stools or unreliable equipment that can jeopardize your safety and workflow in the operating room. Meet SurgiStep, the revolutionary motorized step stool designed to put comfort, safety, and efficiency back into your surgical practice. With effortless height adjustments and enhanced mobility, SurgiStep transforms your surgical experience while supporting exceptional ergonomics. One of the standout features of SurgiStep is their proprietary pedal containment system. This innovative design effectively eliminates workflow disruptions caused by pedals getting kicked off involuntarily, allowing you to focus solely on your patient. In addition to the step stool, SmartStep Surgical offers customized silicone mats which provide anti-slip and anti-fatigue properties to help you maintain your stamina and resilience throughout even the longest of procedures. So take the first step towards a safer, more efficient operating room. Use the link in the podcast to avail yourself of a 20% discount and set up a trial with them right now and revolutionize your surgical practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Surgical Ergonomics podcast. Today, I'm very pleased to have as our guest Dr. Kimberly Kho. She's a professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the Associate Chief of Gynecology, and the Director of the Minimally Invasive Gynecologic Surgery Fellowship Program at UT Southwestern Medical Center. This September, Dr. Kho will be moving to the University of Hawaii in Honolulu as the inaugural Chief of Advanced Gynecology and MIGS and the Associate Chair of Faculty Development. She has served as the Chief of the Medical Staff at William P. Clements Jr. University Hospital and is the co-chair of the Women in Science and Medicine Advisory Committee. In addition to patient care, Dr. Kho has been a National Institutes of Health supported clinical scholar with a focus on evaluating surgical techniques and technologies for the treatment of fibroids, adenomyosis, and endometriosis, and more recently on surgical ergonomics. She currently serves on the board of directors for AAGL. Hello, Kimberly, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Geeta. Thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
Of course. So, Kimberly, as we start out each episode, I want to do the same with you. And I was hoping that you could tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, including kind of where you grew up and where you got your training. You know, what is this new opportunity that you're going to be exploring in Hawaii soon?
Yes, I'm happy to share that story. So I grew up in New York to Chinese American immigrants from the Philippines. I share that because I share the same cultural heritage as Amy Chua, who wrote the Tiger Mom books. So the Yale professor who became famous for that sort of notion of a tiger mom, and that was certainly the culture that I grew up in, and I think definitely impacts why I'm probably here today and on this podcast. So I grew up in New York and ended up doing my joint college and medical program. Was really lucky to get into one of those programs right out of high school and did that in Baylor, College of Medicine, and Rice University. Moved down south to Texas. I did my residency at Columbia University Medical Center back in New York City, and then a fellowship in Atlanta in minimally invasive surgery. And that was back when we had graduated the 100th fellow, so a very early time in the inception of MIGS, as we call it. And then fresh out of training, went to UT Southwestern, was recruited to Dallas to start a MIGS program at one of the largest OBGYN departments and academic training programs for OBGYNs in the country. So I've been there for the past over 15 years, almost 16 years now,
Mhm.
and I'm in the middle of a transition, actually closing up my career there and transitioning to paradise in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii. And I'm so excited, honestly, for this next chapter and excited to have a next chapter at this stage in my career. I'll be starting a new division of advanced gynecology and MIGS, and then working in a leadership role in faculty development for the University of Hawaii. And the opportunity to come here was really brought back to sort of a core mission after
Mhm.
growing a really thriving MIGS program in Dallas. There
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
now, I don't know, 14, 15 MIGS trained folks who are doing the good work in all of Dallas, nine of whom are on the campus at UT Southwestern. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so really one of the biggest
Mhm.
programs in the country.
Mhm.
And we have a great fellowship program and was really felt like that this was an opportunity for me to create something that would be needed and necessary and have an impact for the whole state of Hawaii. So I'm so excited to for this next chapter and to see what the opportunities exist and to help grow these services, which we can talk about,
Mhm.
these needed services for
Right.
women out here in the Pacific Rim.
Yes, indeed, indeed. There are so many areas in the United States where the disparities are so apparent in terms of access to specialized care, whether it be care for endometriosis via mixed trained surgeons, or whether it's, even in my specialty in endocrine surgery, there's like, various kind of pockets where you have so many surgeons and then other places where you have zero access. So
Yes.
I appreciate the fact that you're headed there and going to start this new program, and I'm very excited for you as well.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, hopefully we'll have you come out and speak. No, I
Okay.
have no paucity of folks who are looking forward to the invitation, which I will extend. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is going to be an opportunity and a challenge to, I think, expand these services here. But
Yeah.
so to your point, so much. I've grown up in tertiary academic
Yeah.
medical centers,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for me to stretch my wings
Hmm.
through rural healthcare and really getting to know the community and the needs of this
Right.
community is very specific. I I just couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to grow in this
Yeah.
stage of my career. So
Absolutely. It's that midlife reckoning that we keep
that's right.
talking about, and it's that mid to late career reckoning, what's my legacy going to look like kind of thing.
That's right. And how do I live my
Yeah.
values?
Yeah.
Now that
Live
you've
your value.
achieved what you set out to achieve early in your career, what my tiger mom wanted me to achieve, right? Become a full professor by 40s,
Right.
like all the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Those titles seem to matter a little bit less now that you're there. And
Mhm.
it's really about what impact can I make? What meaningful change can I affect?
Yeah, well, there, among many other things, is where we resonate with each other, right?
Absolutely.
So, sounds like your cognitive ergonomics are going to get a workout.
That's right. I
But
love
I'm
that.
gonna bring you back to the
Yeah.
physical ergonomics piece in this podcast, and I want to share with our listeners actually that we first connected when I was asked to give a talk at the 2024 AAGL annual meeting in November, and the it was going to be a general session talk, a plenary session on the topic of surgical ergonomics. And Dr. Anderson and the other organizers had this wonderful idea of having a couple of members of the AAGL, so MIGS surgeons, share their stories and their journeys regarding kind of work-related musculoskeletal injuries as an introduction to the talk. And I found that it was, much needed and a necessary part of what I was going to talk about, because usually I start a talk with my story, right? My story, because people are often interested, well, how did you become, or how did you start thinking about this topic? So it was so poignant for me to listen to you and your surgical colleagues who talked about their journey. And I'm so grateful that you're here today. And I was hoping that you could share that journey with our listeners as well, because it's really one of grit, resilience, and rebirth. I remember that photograph you put of the Japanese art of kintsugi. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Right? That's right.
Right.
Mhm.
So we'll get into that as well, but I was wondering if you could share your story.
Yes, absolutely. So, I'll start with my training, and I wasn't an athlete, I wasn't aware of sort of body mechanics until, the fatigue of training set in. I
Mhm.
trained in New York City the year that the resident work hours restrictions were instituted. So those were rolled out while I was a trainee. And so the culture, though it has evolved somewhat, was
Yeah.
really that old school, but there was thinking that we needed to progress.
Mhm.
So I was kind of caught between these worlds. It was an intense training program at Columbia and a wonderful training, but an intense one. I will tell you, the first time I became aware of just sort of the physical mismatch
Mhm.
between my body and the operating room and my partners that I was operating with was actually as an intern. And it was when cameras were on us. They were filming, because it was New York, one of those
Mhm.
day in the life documentaries for PBS.
Ah.
And I was training with my chief at the time was over 6 feet tall, Russ Miller, who's still at Columbia. And they were filming us doing a C-section.
Oh,
Luckily, it
wow.
was not a stat C-section, but
Mhm.
there was over a foot mismatch, and
Mhm.
the bed was going up and down to facilitate, my ergonomics and his ergonomics. I got on a stool. The film crew was like, "Would you like a second one?" And I was just a baby intern trying not just to keep it together for the film crews, and really realized that this could be a challenge for the rest of my career.
Mhm. Mhm.
Fast forward to a surgical fellowship, a very demanding, intensive, high volume surgical fellowship. And I started to have pain. We were operating every day.
I was going to say trainees operate every day, not like
We
us
operate, there's
taking
no
breaks at
break, right?
clinic. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, it's a treat to get to go to clinic.
Right.
So
Right.
every day, all day on the ORs, this was when robotics was, just being introduced. So I was mostly doing straight stick conventional laparoscopy. And I started to have pain and saw a physical therapist for the first time because I
Mhm.
realized that this was probably work related and potentially a concern for the rest of my career. However, I was having shoulder pain. We used
Mhm.
what is called a suprapubic fork. The laparoscopists, the
Mhm.
GYN laparoscopists here listening will understand the ergonomic strain involved in that, where exactly. And that just didn't work for my body mechanics. It was shoulder, neck pain. I saw a physical therapist, got taped, did
Mhm.
all the things, didn't need any injections, but learned some exercises and got through my fellowship.
Mhm.
After fellowship, I came to Dallas as the first MIGS surgeon in this sort of storied department, and I had a lot to prove. I was a small Asian American young woman and,
Right.
and felt like I needed to be not just mentally strong, but physically strong, and
Mhm.
replicated all the things I learned in my own training because that's the way I was told was the best way to do it. It was the most
Right.
beautiful way to do surgery, the most elegant, the most efficient, and that's what I did.
Mhm.
And, when you get there as the person who's supposed to start a program and everyone says, oh, here's this fellowship trained surgeon, you
Mhm.
get the hardest cases. But they were
Mhm.
almost like straight out of training, and it was intimidating. So the last thing I wanted to tell anybody, and I think this story probably resonates for you, and I hear it over and over, is that I'm physically in pain.
Mhm.
I didn't cry uncle. I didn't seek help, and you just kept it to yourself because you were supposed to be strong, right? Being strong is what a surgeon is, right? That's the compliment that you give your trainees. Oh, strong work. You're so strong. We talk about trainees in their evaluations. This is a strong resident. The
Right.
opposite of strong is weak, right? And being in pain was a sign of weakness. So I started to have lower back pain, spent my young faculty
Yeah.
salary paying
Mhm.
for massages, that became a regular
I
part.
see.
I did all the things that I thought I was going to do, supposed to do, except tell anyone that I was struggling. This went on, and I was pretty pig-headed, and my research showed that, laparoscopy was just as good as robotics for patient outcomes. That was what I was focused on. I was at that point, I published in our big journals, the green journals,
Right,
studies
right.
demonstrating the great outcomes of laparoscopy. So I almost dug in, you became dogmatic about it. I'm not going to do robotics. I'm just going to be a straight stick conventional laparoscopist, no matter the impact on my own body, right? Because the patients are doing great and we can do this at better cost. This is what we're talking about, healthcare value, right?
Hmm, hmm.
Surgeon, the team does not come into that math, into that equation, but that's a very short-sighted, as I know now, a very
Right, right.
short-sighted mathematics, the equation. So I dug in and I just continued to have pain until, and I built the program. We started a fellowship, we recruited people, we became the largest fellowship training program in the country.
Mhm.
And then about 5 years ago, the fall that I got told that I was going to become a full professor, I'd got all the things just muscling through just by sheer force.
Mhm.
It was December, right after that announcement that I had been granted my full professorship and got piled on a few more endowments. It was just such a winning feeling, like I had done
Right,
it
right.
with my own strength. It was the holidays, everyone's trying to get their surgeries in before the new year. December, everyone knows
Yes.
December.
Especially in oncology. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and benign laparoscopy. Everyone had paid for their MRIs and all the
Injectables.
things. They're
Yeah.
ready, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So right before I took a break at the end of December, we were supposed to go to Disneyland. I was having severe buttock pain, and I
Mhm.
knew it. Chronic pelvic pain, endometriosis, surgeon. It was piriformis syndrome. I was convinced it was piriformis pain. And so I went to my friendly PM&R docs, and of course they're like, yes, obviously, that's the distribution. And they're great friends of mine, and they listened and they knew I needed to go to Disneyland in 2 days. And they gave me an injection, and I felt tremendous relief.
Mm.
I walked 30,000 steps a day with my kids. It was the best vacation.
Mhm.
But nothing in me triggered that I should change what I was doing.
Mhm.
Because we're so programmed from our youth, our tiger mom parents, and our residency and our fellowship to keep going because you're being rewarded for it, right?
Right.
All the external rewards. It was addictive, it's workaholism, right? And so I never stopped and I
Mhm.
just kept doing. I came back after the holidays and hit the ground running. And I didn't listen to my body. I didn't respect what it was telling me. I just put a band-aid on it. I put a steroid injection into it and told it to calm down. And I didn't work it up. I didn't go back to my PMS appointment.
I see.
And then in February, 2 months later, I was doing a hard stage 4 endometriosis surgery. And by this point, I had modulated some certain things. I stopped using a suprapubic port. I used ipsilateral ports, which are a little bit better, ergonomically,
Mhm.
but was still standing on my sometimes two-step stool so I could operate with my taller trainees. And I came home and I wasn't feeling good. My back hurt, the usual things of taking Motrin, stretching. I even had a gabapentin to take, didn't help. And that night I went to sleep and woke up in excruciating pain. It was classic sciatic pain. And I had never experienced pain like that before,
Right.
ever.
Right.
And I just cried through the night, whimpering, not wanting to wake my husband up. And I desperately didn't text my PM&R friends, but I emailed them, the physical med rehab doctors who had initially seen me. So I said, when you guys read this in the morning, please call me. I can't get out of bed. And of course, they texted me immediately and said, show up at 8 a.m. We will be there. I had searing pain from my left buttock down to my foot and could barely walk, could barely get in the car to sit to get
Mhm.
to my doctor's appointment. We have open notes. And so I could see what was written about me.
I see.
And the note said, Dr. Kho is a 44-year-old surgeon. We found her who calls for extreme pain, chief complaint, extreme pain. She was found on the floor of our waiting room, um, lying on the floor because she could not sit, crying in pain. And when I read the note, I knew that this was a story that I had kind of dissociated from, had never expected that I would be there. And there I was, so
Right.
vulnerable, so afraid. And, I took steroids. We did oral steroids. They got me in for an MRI, and just having the privilege of being a part of the medical community, I got this done much faster than most anyone would. And it
Right.
showed a very obvious disc herniation.
Mhm.
We tried to treat it with steroids. I did feel better because steroids make you feel fantastic.
I can
Um,
vouch for that as an endocrine surgeon.
yeah, yeah, steroids are amazing.
They're
Um,
amazing. Yeah.
and lasted for about a week and then started having foot drop.
Oh.
And my neurosurgeon, who I had seen in the interim, had given me his cell phone number, Carlos Bagley, and he said, if you develop foot drop, you must call me immediately. And on a weekend, I called him. I didn't even get to my steroid injection, right? That was
Mm,
scheduled later that week. And that it was a surgical emergency. And I, was put immediately on the schedule for early the next week to have a microdiscectomy.
mhm.
And that's where I ended up, Geeta, and having a part of, having an urgent, emergent microdiscectomy so I didn't lose function in my left leg at
Right.
44. At that
Right.
point, nothing mattered. Titles,
Mhm.
nothing was going to get me out of this, right? And it was so scary and so vulnerable, but I didn't change anything, Geeta. I got back out of anesthesia, and because my anesthesia were so great, I didn't even feel groggy. I got back on my phone and started answering emails in PACU
Right. Right.
because I actually felt no pain. I was like, oh, now I can concentrate.
Now I can work.
Now I can work again.
Yeah.
And it was my husband who said, there's something not right going on here. You
I
know,
see.
you've got to take time off. And, I
Mhm.
submitted all my FMLA papers and all of that. But I, on the other hand, felt shame and
Mhm.
felt I was burdening my colleagues with the surgeries that I had scheduled that they were going to have to do now. That's what I got on my emails to do, to say, oh, maybe I'll be back so I can do these surgeries. I was crazy. The risk of reherniation in the first 3 months after a discectomy is 7%. That's not insignificant.
Right.
And it took someone who loves me and didn't come from my career, from the job site to say, you're crazy. This is
Mhm.
insane. You are not going back.
Mhm.
You need to take the 6 to 8 weeks off so that you
Mhm.
do not reherniate that disc. And it was a reprogramming
Right.
that point on. I had the actually needing surgery did not reprogram me. Watching myself in a mirror, pick up my phone and answer emails an hour after coming out of the OR was shocking. Um, and I realized that I had to work through the shame and the guilt, you know, and that, over that time period of actually recovering, I realized that like I was actually part of the problem too. I was a fellowship director. I was a mentor to so many people, to young faculty and trainees who were watching how I
Mhm.
responded. And I
Right.
still wanted my cape and my superwoman,
Mhm.
persona. And I realized that if I did not show them that this is a really scary and vulnerable time and a very possible outcome for behaving this way, then this was just going to be replicated. Then I would not have taught them the most valuable lesson that you can
Right.
be vulnerable and ask for help and not be, and I didn't report on my FMLA papers. They asked, is this a work-related musculoskeletal injury? And like, the 80% of us who go through this, I said no, because I was afraid that
Mhm.
there would be ramifications. And I started to realize that I had internalized so much guilt and shame.
Mhm. Mhm.
And during that time, I said, we've got to redo that. I have to be a part of this solution because I really literally was broken and on my knees. And I love my trainees so much. I love my colleagues. I
Mhm.
didn't want to see another person experience that. And I started to talk about it, and that's where you and I ended up, right, on this stage together at AAGL talking about it. And to make a long story short, I realized that it was actually about sharing vulnerability where we get our strengths. So it's that whole concept of the Japanese kintsugi, the ceramic bowl breaks and you put it back together. And there was
With
such a
gold paint,
and
right?
with
With
gold
gold
paint, right?
paint.
Yeah, with
Right.
gold paint. And to
Yeah.
make something more beautiful that out of what's broken, because we're all actually a little broken, right? If we haven't been physically broken, we're probably a little emotionally broken or a lot. And
Yeah.
we've got to talk about that. And I think that we've made so many strides talking about the mental health burdens, especially with
Absolutely.
COVID, but we're still beginning to talk about the physical burdens of the work that we do.
Indeed.
And then after our TED Talk, Etha, you and I, you were surrounded by people who wanted to talk to you. And this one man came up to me. He was this just really graceful, older gentleman from Latin America, because it's an international conference. He came up to me crying with tears in his eyes. I don't know if you saw. And he said to me that he had kept inside for 20 years, something that he was about to share with me.
Hmm.
And he said that he knows that he disabled one of his trainees because he
Wow.
said I bullied him into continuing to operate through pain and injury until he was unable to recover. And
Wow.
that OBGYN is out in the world practicing medicine, but unable to do surgery anymore. And he really believed that it was because of him, the culture that he allowed in his operating room. And he said that he'd never spoken that guilt out loud. And so I realized like he and I were part of the same story, right? We
Wow.
and it was a release for him to share
So
that.
profound. So
It was
profound.
profound
Yeah.
that unless we start to discuss this and really find solutions and change the cultures in our ORs, like directly to the person in front of us and the rest of the OR, that this story will be replicated over and over again.
Yeah.
And I know that that's the work that you're doing, but it was so profound. And it was only after that I started talking about it that all the older surgeons who I had called into the ORs when I was in trouble and needed help, it was the
Uh-huh.
first time they said, until when I gave my med talk, that
Right.
they said, I'm going through that too, and
Right.
never said it out loud. So we are
Right.
suffering in silence
Mhm.
unnecessarily and keeping that shame to ourselves. And when we do that, we drive it underground instead of shining light on it and working to make it better. So I'm so glad to see, the Society for Surgical Ergonomics and all of our professional societies
Mhm.
bringing this to the limelight, to bring this to a plenary and to share the story. But we need to do more than share the stories, right? We have to find actionable solutions, which I know we're all working on.
Right. Right. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and sort of indicate to our listeners that, I can kind of feel the raw emotion still in your story. This is the second time that I'm hearing it. And the pain and the suffering that you experienced is palpable. But I can also tell that kintsugi work has started. It started when you were staring at yourself in the mirror after surgery, answering your emails, and it continues and will continue. And you're on this new journey to, as you said, change the culture, right? And we discuss this often on this podcast that we're the ones that were, by we, I mean surgeons made surgical culture, right? We then instill the same in our trainees, who then instill the same in their trainees. So my hope is that, in a generation or two, there will be a different culture.
Yes.
And, I know you've been talking about sort of, it is nature and nurture, right? So it is the tiger mom, the overachiever, the perfectionist. All of these kinds of personalities are attracted to medicine and then self-select even further into surgical disciplines, right? And then you have some external pressures, but a lot of internal pressures, right? A lot of this, what you mentioned, is internalized. And I think a couple of podcast episodes ago, when Sarah Temkin was a guest, discussing her film, we talked about this. I was the first woman of Indian origin as a resident in the Toronto General Surgery program in 1995. Okay. And I felt that internal pressure, man, they will never let another one like me again if I fail. And when you said you didn't change. I completely kind of can see where that came from because when I herniated my first disc, I was a resident. It was a lower back disc. It was so bad I had to call my family. My brother came and it was 6 a.m. and I needed to get to the bathroom and I couldn't get to the bathroom. I had been limping around for weeks, right? Like when you have a lower disc I should say impending herniation for people who haven't experienced it, it's like this constant pressure and you feel like you walk around like a pregnant woman, okay? I wasn't pregnant at the time, but I walked around like a pregnant woman because that was the most comfortable thing. And the only time that pain went away was when the disc finally herniated. Now, I did not have motor symptoms, but I had sensory symptoms for a long time before the disc herniation occurred. And my aha moment, not that I had the ability to change anything, but my aha moment was when my brother actually came because I couldn't get to the bathroom. He picked up a urinal on the way home, like a lady's female,
Right, right.
bedpan, I should say, not a urinal. I was trying to empty my bladder for the first time using, this bedpan, and I struggled. And so I asked him to help me get to the bathroom. I got to the bathroom and I think I couldn't pull my pants up. I had to put my arms around his neck. I have never shared this story other than within the family. And he had to lift me up off the commode and my pants fell down. And I said to him, "Don't look down." And he's like, "Don't worry about it. Let's just get to bed." So we got to bed and I'm like, "But it's 7 o'clock and I have to get to rounds." And he literally just kind of, I think he gave me not a physical whack, but the mental whack, the kind you received from your husband, right? That can only come from someone who's not in medicine, who
That's right.
loves you,
Who
right?
loves you? Who
Yeah.
sees it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who sees it. And he goes, "Geet, I just picked you off the commode and you brought you to bed with your pants wrapped around your ankles. What do you mean you have to go to the hospital to round? Just call them and tell them that, you're out of commission."
Right, right.
But that pressure to get back was there. I was an intern. I only took a week off. Luckily, I didn't need surgery. I went back. I was in pain for months and I kept working. And I didn't know any of, like you mentioned, I wasn't, an athlete. I didn't understand body mechanics. You were just out to learn and prove yourself. And the second time this happened, this was now, I was a fellow operating on two lifts, headlight loops, I knew what was happening, but again, I felt powerless to say something.
That's right.
Yeah. And my brother found me again because now I was in a different town and he happened to be in the Bay
The great
Area.
brother.
Right. So poor guy has seen me through two different disc herniations. So this happens again. And, this time I crawled to the door to open the door in tears, just like you said, because, outside of having delivered children, maybe kidney stones and disc herniation, it's like you remember where you were when it happened.
100%.
100%, right? So he again, I said, "I have to get to the OR." And he's like, "Geets, okay, I just picked you up off the floor where you were crying. Okay, you're not going anywhere." This time I didn't take much convincing. I was like, "Okay, okay, I got it." Part of it is us, part of it is external pressure, part of it is the pressure we put on ourselves. A lot of it is the culture we were raised in, both inside and outside the hospital. But the point is that, we're starting to recognize this. This is a silent epidemic. It takes us to share our stories to reduce the stigma around it and get the conversations going, which we are, right? We still have a long way to go, like you said. We have to implement things to make things better, and we're going to get into this next in the podcast. But I just want to, again, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story, not only at AAGL, but in the podcast. When if anyone can sort of find their own story in what we're sharing in almost every episode, then we've accomplished something.
Right, right.
Right.
And the data supports it, right? That
Yes.
nearly everyone listening to this, or who doesn't even listen to this and is performing surgery, is
Yeah.
experiencing something like we have experienced. Maybe it's not so
Right.
dramatic, but they're
Right.
coming home in pain, right? And
Right. Right.
and it's that you used a word that said, "I felt powerless to
Yeah.
make change." And maybe
Yeah.
it's because of where we are in our career that we feel the privilege to do this, right?
Yes.
But I
Yes.
will tell you that it is, maybe I think it'll happen in a generation, I
Yep.
hope, less than two, because I have had trainees that aren't even mine who were at AAGL and heard us speak, who've reached out to
Yes.
me personally and said, "I asked for a stool because of you. I told them, don't call me a diva. Don't call
Yes.
it my princess pad,
Add.
because I need this." And I stood tall and stood my ground
Yeah.
because you guys allowed me permission to do that.
Oh, that is so wonderful to hear, right? So, oh, that is that is a testament to, the work that you and
That
others
we
are.
are, that this whole
Yeah,
community is doing by sharing our stories, right? They
right.
are scared. They
Yeah,
don't want this to happen to them.
right.
And I think that perhaps this newer generation of
Hmm.
surgeons
Hmm.
will fear less the concern about showing vulnerability and advocate for themselves. And by advocating for themselves, we advocate for everybody else in that room, including the tech, including the nurse, right?
Exactly,
Because
exactly.
we are saying, I am a human being, not a robot, and I have needs, and they should be honored,
Right.
right?
Agreed, agreed. So, I want to switch tracks just a little bit because I know you just mentioned the data, right? So we're going to have gynecologists listening to the podcast, but also other laparoscopists, right?
Yeah.
Because as you said, straight stick laparoscopy. I think the one of the first papers in ergonomics was that, patients have better outcomes, but surgeons suffer because of laparoscopy, which is what
That's
you described.
right.
So tell me the data in gynecologic surgeons, what have you found in your most
Yeah.
recent work? And then perhaps also share, what you have learned about best practices in laparoscopy, specifically for gynecologists, and then maybe some other tips and tricks that you are now absolutely doing, non-negotiables for you, and that you are teaching your trainees.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all familiar with the big meta-analyses that have been out there,
Yeah.
but specific to gynecology, there have been a few surveys, even, over 10 years ago, 2013, Kim Fine looked at vaginal surgeons specifically, and we've always thought, oh, that's a very strange way to operate through the vagina. Not strange, but ergonomically strange
Right, right.
because it's a narrow space, legs are up. And they showed about an 86% rate of work-related injuries for specifically vaginal surgeons. And then there were more national surveys, in the Netherlands, similar rates of musculoskeletal pain and injury after pain after operating. And then, I think robotic surgery was supposed to be the promised land for all of us, but it actually, studied by Lee in 2017, actually showed a very high rate of physical discomfort in after robotic surgery. Over half of the robotic surgeons were experiencing pain. So
Hmm.
we wanted to get a broader picture of high volume GYN surgeons. So
Sure.
just in July of 2025, myself and Riley Young and our team at UT Southwestern, we published a large survey of over 300 respondents to a national survey. And
Hmm.
it's in JMIG, the Journal of Minimally Invasive Gynecology, which is our main journal
Hmm. Hmm.
subspecialty. And we sampled both attendings and fellows, because as you say, fellows are operating probably more than attendings, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
and we oversampled for MIGS surgeons because that's what we were interested in. And then we sampled, what represents the workforce, the current workforce. So over
Hmm.
70% of our respondents, which is reflective of the OB-GYN workforce now and in training, female surgeons. So
Right, right.
this more current evaluation, I think, really kind of reflects what's probably out there at this slice of time.
Hmm.
And we were not surprised, but we found that over 95% of respondents said they are experiencing discomfort or pain during surgery or after surgery.
Hmm.
And that's the highest rate that's been reported in any study that we found. So, now we're investigating, is there something specific to what we're doing in the operating room, or is it something specific to our workforce, or it's probably a combination of both, right? These are
Right,
small,
right.
largely women doing vaginal, laparoscopic, and robotic surgery. And you know what? We also found that 60% of the folks who responded said that this was impacting them in the OR and their ability to concentrate. And we found so many other pieces of information that just really, I think, is just the beginning of this
Hmm.
conversation. And we replicate a lot of studies that were done in ENT and other fields, but to really highlight what the concerns were in GYN. And I'll share some just sort of high level findings from this study that a quarter of us were changing their surgical modality based on their pain, right? Of course, right?
I'm
If
guilty
that,
of the same. I'm
yeah,
guilty of the same.
if the outcomes are similar,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
then why not do the thing that's going to make you feel better, right? And this had not been a part of the conversation. We often have debates, and you've come to our meetings. We're talking about the benefits of vaginal over robotic, over laparoscopy. The wash is probably, from a clinical standpoint, things are pretty similar, right? If you're getting operated on by a high volume surgeon. So a quarter of us are saying, hey, I can't do conventional laparoscopy all day, every day. I'm going to do robotics, or I'm going to change to vaginal. And is that the best thing from the health system standpoint? I don't know, because there are different costs, but no one is adding in the cost of the lost surgeon, right? And that, going back to the equation,
100%.
needs
Yeah.
to go
That
back in.
equation. Yeah.
Over 10% are adjusting their surgical schedules, right? We already know we're going to have a surgeon,
Shortage.
and we're certainly having an OBGYN shortage, and we're having that already in specific
Mhm.
regions. If we're canceling cases or operating less because of this, then that's going to have an impact on patient care. About a fifth of us admitted to saying the pain impacts my ability and desire to actually, my willingness to teach trainees. So it is having generational impact, right? This is the legacy of having surgeons in pain. And impatient people are desperately looking for other interventions to make themselves feel better. And I know that that's a lot of the work you're doing. Over 80% of our respondents said they're doing things actively to treat their pain, their own pain, and
Mhm.
a lot of it's massage, chiropractic, acupuncture,
Right.
NSAIDs,
Yeah. Very similar to so many other studies.
yeah,
Yeah.
so similar, so similar. And so that's what we found, and it's just compounded, I think, by the large group of women in our field, and
Uh-huh.
they're coming up in more and more our trainees right now. I think our workforce is 70% women. That's more, even more in the young trainees.
Yeah.
So that will change unless our operating environments and instrumentation change with us. This will continue, and it will grow. And then we're going to have an issue with having adequate surgeons who can take care of patients. And
Right.
maybe that's when the public health crisis will be
Mhm.
highlighted, but we're hoping, I think, to stop the bleed here
Right.
and
Right.
now.
Yeah.
So, that is largely what we found, and it was just so consistent, but even higher rates of pain in this community, in this
Right. Yeah,
demographic.
no, I thank you for sharing that paper with me because it's just hot off the press, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I had seen the previous, data and have
yeah.
presented on the FINE paper and other, we know that among all surgeons, any minimally invasive approach is going to lead to higher rates of fatigue and pain. And a particular pain point for any specialty is being a female surgeon or a surgeon who is at the extremes of, as we say, anthropometrics, right? Whether that's hand, body, if you're at either extreme, you're in trouble because the instruments weren't designed for you. And it happens to be highlighted more in a specialty that is predominantly made up of women because women are the ones who are going to have the smaller hands by and large, right?
Right, right.
So none of this, as you said, is surprising. Now, as various societies get involved in this work, and particularly the Society of Surgical Ergonomics, industry is listening. There were industry at the AAGL meeting, particularly this talk. I've interacted with many reps, and then also at the recent SGO meeting where my partner and I did that ergonomics corner, like sort of live on one-on-one coaching after our workshop. Industry is listening, but until we can get those changes, like I asked earlier, what have you learned and what are you recommending and other gynecologists recommending as best practices to protect our workforce, like you said, in this impending shortage?
So I will be, again, vulnerable and honest.
Yes.
I've shifted almost entirely from conventional laparoscopy because that is the biggest risk factor. I'm finally listening to my PM&R doc and my physical therapist, who
Yeah.
are my
Yeah.
friends, actually, and I
Yeah.
have them on text messages. And they said that is your biggest risk. The way that even if we teach you the best ways to stand,
Yeah.
your injury, which is
Yeah.
always going to be there, is
Yeah.
going to be prone to
Right.
re-injury.
Because you're standing and
Because
you're
I'm
twisting your
standing in an
spine.
oblique way in a twisted spine.
Yeah.
You and
Yep.
I did that beautiful software that you had. Even knowing that I was being filmed for a master class, I, even using all the things that I do, my body is contorting
Hmm.
to accommodate that modality.
Right.
So vast majority of my surgeries have transitioned to robotics.
Hmm.
And that has actually, I think, is going to be what provides me longevity through my
Hmm.
career. I probably would have had to stop if that were not an option. And in fact, moving to the Hawaii, the first question I asked is, what is my access to a robot,
Robot.
or I'm not the person for you. And luckily it's, 100%. But I still do laparoscopy and because there's not a robot in every room. And
Hmm.
I am meticulous on the robot about ergonomics. Before I even let my trainees sit on the dual console, I say, set up your ergonomics and then adjust it.
Hmm.
But in a laparoscopy, in a room, it's about the room setup. And often we are going in after a thyroidectomy. So the
Hmm.
tower is not where it's supposed to be. The monitors are exactly opposite. And here we are, all five, two of us, me and my trainees pushing the monitors exactly where we need them to float, right? And there's so many guides around the ideal ways to set up a room. So I'm
Hmm.
meticulous about that,
Hmm.
where my monitors are, 10 degrees below my line of vision, all of that, right? So we're
Yeah.
not torquing and twisting or
Hmm.
minimizing that, but you'll never eradicate that from the way that we operate in the pelvis for GYN.
Hmm.
And for vaginal cases, which I don't do a lot of anymore, I'm being really sensitive to the height of the table, to my assistants, to sitting when needed,
Right.
to my
Right.
feet being planted on the floor at a 90 degree. It just the body mechanics of it, right?
Hmm.
I used my funds because I couldn't find anything else, my endowment fund, to buy anti-fatigue mats for every single person in the OR, from our scrubs to our techs to everybody. So there are boxes
Amazing.
and there should be no shame in asking for them. And I tell my residents and trainees that. And then
I'm
you'll
going
laugh.
to halt you right there, actually, because I just want to make sure I heard this right. So
Yeah,
you used your own funds to
yep,
purchase anti-fatigue mats.
that's right.
Now, this to me is I call it the poster child of where we are in ergonomics when it comes to operating room personnel, right? Like every other industry,
Right.
industry is required by OSHA and other regulatory bodies to provide for worker safety, right? What boots do you need? What, things like that. So, as far as I'm concerned, and the way it should be is that the hospitals should be providing us with anti-fatigue mats and all the necessary, equipment like the, ergonomic headlights, like you said, access to the robot, if that is what is leading to improved ergonomics, etc. Doesn't work for everybody, but for 90% of people, sitting at a console and not having to stand and twist your spine, just the degrees of freedom that come with the robot make a difference.
That's right.
So, that being said, I have heard various stories. Not you're not alone in having bought them yourself because you've tried or maybe haven't tried or whatever, institution has been lagging in buying them. And in Canada, practitioners, surgeons are independent contractors, right? Like they have a billing number from the government, and I've heard Canadian surgeons say that they've had to buy their own anti-fatigue mats and put their names and things on them. But I just want to highlight this for anyone who's listening to the podcast or is trying to advocate, for something as simple as anti-fatigue mats. Really, it's institutions who should be providing this. We do not come under the purview of OSHA, but I don't think there's harm in saying that at some point we will probably, end up being sort of regulated our workspace. I think the college might even get involved at some point in terms of mandating certain things that need to be part of the workspace. I'm hoping for that.
Absolutely, Geeta. I think you hit the nail on the head on that. We are hodgepodging and again, putting band-aids on things as
Yeah,
individuals.
yeah,
This
yeah.
needs to be a systems approach,
Systems
right?
approach, right?
And everyone saw the beautiful mats that I bought.
Hmm. Yeah. And everyone wants them.
And
Once you
everyone
bring them
wants
in the
them,
OR, once you bring them in the OR,
Yeah.
the scrub techs will find them for you, even if
Yeah,
you forget, because they
because
love
they
it
want
too.
them too,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, and that's what I thought. Culture change starts here. I'm going to
Yes,
demonstrate that everybody wants them, and then when the orthopedic surgeons ask for them, the hospital will pay for them. It shouldn't be that way. I say that
right.
ironically,
No, no,
but
I get it. I get it. Sometimes when things seem absurd, we have to laugh about
you
them.
have
Yeah,
to laugh about it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so going back though to
yeah, yeah. So the
the
anti-fatigue
changes,
mats,
the
yeah,
non-negotiables.
negotiables. Yeah.
you know those are the non-negotiables. The having, I'm 5'2", I operate with folks of all heights. We've got to use our lifts, as you call them, or our platforms. And,
Steps, yeah.
we use foot pedals. So you can't just jam your own little body and 3 foot pedals on one platform because everything's falling off. You're falling off, right? Then you're
Hmm.
twisting your body so you can be small. You need, adequate space to create the correct height levels. And then I'm not a runner, but I wear running shoes every day. And
Guilty,
guilty.
guilty.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are not the same as the shoes that I can kick off on my robot days, right?
Right.
So, and then this sounds crazy, but I mean, it's not. You've had Susan Hallback on this platform. We do stretches. We stretch before, we do intraoperative stretches.
I'm a
I,
huge advocate,
I'm a,
nothing crazy about it. It is actually the best intervention. If you look at industrial engineering, I mean, I think you can see, these days on construction sites, like workers are doing their stretches before they start their construction
that's
day,
right.
right?
And so we institute that, and my team does our stretches.
Do you
And
use the app, the
I
OR
don't
stretch,
use the app, but we've
but you
done
have
them so
your,
much.
yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Doesn't matter. You
absolutely.
don't have to. The app is a place to start, as we
That's
tell people.
right. And you weave it into, the culture.
Right,
And I will tell you that I can physically feel the difference. Those are non-negotiables because they're necessary. Just like
right.
you were saying, everybody wants the anti-fatigue meds. Everyone wants to do the stretches. Everyone wants to take a micro break, right? And it's good if we're going to do what feels good for our body, right? And so we introduce these changes, and then they become part of the culture because we've made it such that because they're beneficial, right? We're not going to do things that feel harmful, but we need an environment. And I think this is also key, and it's part of the whole recreating the culture or rewriting this
Hmm.
culture. Like you said, we are the culture, right?
Hmm.
To create time and space for this and to say in the middle of the case, hey, my monitor has drifted.
Hmm. Hmm.
Please bring it back. Or I need another platform because the foot pedal keeps falling off. The space to allow for those questions without being labeled as high maintenance or a
Hmm.
diva. And it's not a female thing, right? These were men who approached me after our TED Talks, right?
Yes.
It's everyone and
Hmm.
creating a space that is open to supporting one another. So and
Absolutely.
that's on us. That's on every single surgeon that's in there in that
Yeah,
room.
absolutely. Very well said and summarized. I just looked at the clock, and as always, I think I
Right.
sound like a rote parrot. Every episode I say this, oh my God, where did the time go? And because it's true, right? When we start talking about something like this that we're both passionate about, it's only natural that we don't realize the passage of time. And I'm excited for all the work you've been doing for ergonomics as part of the AAGL board of directors and at UT Southwestern. And I'm now really excited for all this knowledge and know-how and your expertise that you're going to take to the University of Hawaii. And I can see kind of ergonomics percolating through your faculty development work as well. It'll be a component of that because it all falls under kind of that umbrella. Part of faculty development is protecting your faculty, right? And
That's
teaching them how to, as you said, advocate for themselves. That will enhance their longevity and over the long term, what matters to hospital administrators, which is the bottom line. Surgeons in pain are not going to be productive. So that investment up front will pay huge dividends down the road.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I will add that AAGL actually we're putting together a task force to address surgical ergonomics. It's on a society level, and because this is a service to our membership, it's a service to our people, our community, and our colleagues, and this work just needs to continue. And I think that we will be collaborating with Society for
That is
Surgical
surgical
Ergonomics,
ergonomics.
ideally with
Yeah.
yourself and Susan and it's not one person, it's not 95% of my field are in pain. And if every single one of us raises their hands a little even,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
creates space in their operating room for us to have these discussions, then
Hmm.
we will change culture in less than a generation.
Agreed and amen to that. Kimberly, thanks very much again for the time you took out of your crazy schedule. By the way, people, she just kind of made it to Hawaii 2 days ago and is just setting up her condo. So, amidst all this life change, she agreed to meet with me, and for that, I am eternally grateful. So, Thank you once again, Kim, and look forward to continuing our conversations.
Thank you, Geeta.
We're grateful to Smart Steps Surgical LLC for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can learn more about them and schedule a demo via the link in the show notes. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We love feedback, so please reach out to us for topics, ideas, speakers, or if you ever want to be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.